come back to here and it will tell me when we're live.
There's on here, we're already live.
Hey, good morning everybody, thanks for joining us. This is my lovely guest Natasha, who I'll introduce you to properly in a minute. So today I'm starting a series of lives every Tuesday called Time to Talk Tuesday. I am aware that I've kind of nicked the mental health one, but I like Time to Talk. And then when Natasha said, who's my first guest, said she could do Tuesday, I tapped in hashtag Time to Talk and it came up Tuesday. And I'd already posted one that said Time to Talk Tuesday. And I thought, well, that's obviously completely meant to be. So the idea of our lives is every week I'm going to touch for the next couple of months. So where are we? It'll probably run through till March sometime. I'm going to touch on a subject to do with death and dying. And have a guest who's going to talk about it with me, give us their knowledge, and we'll just have a chat about that particular topic. Going through from today's conversation is about the death conversation, so that's starting to talk about death and dying, how you can do that, what Natasha does to help people do that, and I do as well. Going through, there'll be about funerals, there'll be cremation, burials. We'll be talking to some funeral directors, talking to other celebrants, and I've got a soul midwife who's going to come on and chat to us as well about the palliative care she does, which is something I'm training to do too, so I'm really looking forward to that one. But to kick off, I have the lovely Natasha Steer with me. Good morning, Natasha.
Good morning.
Now, Natasha's from the wonderfully named Brown Bread Collective. Now, I'm going to hand over to Natasha and let her explain to you what that is. So Natasha, can you tell us a little bit about the wonderful name, please?
Yeah, so the Brown Bread Collective was formed around 2 years ago now, actually, and it came out of myself and a few others in Medway having very open conversations around death, dying and bereavement. I was going to be studying death, dying and bereavement, which I now have as part of my health and social care degree. And just through personal experiences really had come to that kind of idea that we should form something that represents that locally. We do have death, dying and bereavement kind of strategy in Medway, which mainly is acted out through Dying Matters, but and through like public health in that way, but there was nothing in the community setting that was really doing it. We didn't have a death cafe. There maybe had been one held a few years ago, but there was nothing that was very active and regular. So we formed the Brown Bread Collective. So it's me, Candy and Rachel. There were a few others at the beginning, but just generally due to commitments they weren't able to continue supporting in a proactive way, but obviously lots of moral support always. And
I love that name.
Yeah, it took a lot of playing around with, but it works really well because people are like brown bread and they're like, oh, okay. And it's great because it just makes them laugh to begin with, you know.
Yeah.
What else would you like to know, I guess?
Well, I mean, I love the fact that you came up with that name, and I think that sort of that kind of sets a tone. It kind of makes you go, okay, so we're talking about death, but this isn't perhaps morbid. It's not you must come and be miserable and talk about death. And I think the fact that you've got a jokey one, I mean, brown bread is obviously Cockney rhyming slang for dead, you know, and I think that is, you know, it makes people think, oh, hang on, this isn't going to be a completely miserable experience. It's about something that can be miserable. And that's, I mean, when a friend of ours, Ruth, introduced us, and when she, you know, and I was like, I went the Brown Bread Collective, and I can be irreverent, I can be, you know, very light-hearted, you know, as a funeral celebrant, that's, you know, I have to temper that, I have to say, but you know, and I was like, wow, you know, don't go in cracking jokes, you know, hasten to add, but I can only if they want me to, only if that's what's in my script and they've given me an anecdote. Yeah, I mean, some people want that, you know, so, but when I saw the name I was just like, wow, that is a really cool name. I mean, the one I do is just boringly called Time to Talk, because I thought I wanted it to be something friendly and approachable, and I think the Brown Bread Collective is just, that's awesome. So that's why you set yours up. So can you tell us a bit about what happens when you go to yours? And because obviously now they're online. Previously,
Yeah, so
you met in person, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so the collective has done a few different things. So we've had an art exhibition actually that was
Okay.
facilitated through MCH Healthcare through their clinic in Gillingham. So we had an art exhibition up as part of Dying Matters Week. And we generally try to facilitate conversation online through like our Facebook page and post up a lot of different really interesting articles, and we are, as individuals, I guess, proactively researching and working in the community within that. So we're representatives always of the Brown Bread Collective within the work that we do. So Rachel works a lot within fundraising within hospices and helping them to raise money, which is very important.
Yeah.
Candy works within local healthcare and is kind of, I think, three quarters trained as a deaf doula now.
Okay.
And then I'm working within community engagement, and so working with people with lots of different needs that often those conversations come up, they've experienced trauma in the past. So that's kind of the bulk of what we do. And then Candy had always wanted to set up a deaf cafe locally, and so I was like, well, please, can you do it with the Brown Bread Collective so that we regularly have something that is running. So then so it'll be 2 years this month that she's been running the Deaf Cafe, the Medway Deaf Cafe. And where did we start doing it? I'm trying to think. We've been mainly running it from Dragon Co-working in Chatham, which is a co-working space based in the St George Hotel, and it's a nice space because there's sofas and there's like a kitchen that people can just make their own drinks, and which is obviously what the Deaf Cafe is about, that it's a relaxed setting. And Candy's family very luckily also work for a big catering company, so we were able to get incredible cakes, like I can't even.
Oh wow. Cake is always good.
Yeah, it's part of like what you're meant to have at a deaf cafe, so
yes,
that's been sorely missed during lockdown, that's for sure. And we've had a variety of approaches from the people that have attended. Some people have come maybe a couple of times and got something out of their system, and then there's some which they attend regularly and it's kind of almost part of their routine. But we mostly find, and what I've witnessed from other deaf cafes as well, is that people come for a time, they process something through that, even though it's obviously not a counselling situation, it's just open discussion, but they process something, they get something out in the open, and then they kind of done what they've needed to and they move on. So it's quite interesting from that point of view. It's like it is kind of like a peer support, but
it is. I mean, the original deaf cafes were set up in London by John Underwood, weren't they?
Such a great name.
That was it. I've got a feeling it was early 2000s. I should have looked it up. I did look it up, but I've forgotten. I should have written it down. And I know he died only a few years ago. I think it was 2017, wasn't it? And he set this up with his mum or partner and that's where the name Deaf Cafe comes from. And that is where you sit down with a cup of tea and a slice of cake and you talk about everything to do with death. That's why Natasha's has got a different name, and that's why mine has got a different name, because we don't quite, to use their name.
We do call it the Medway Deaf Cafe. Is run under the banner.
It is run under that, is it?
Yeah, we haven't yet come up with our own name for the cafes. We might do at some point, because it would be nice to offer, because you're not allowed to offer signposting within the Deaf Cafe. So we might at some point design something that is our own, but at the moment
your own name,
using the model, because we're still kind of learning,
evolving it
almost.
That's what I found difficult, as having worked in health and social care for the last 2 decades. I found it would be almost impossible for me not to signpost. I mean, it's like sitting on your hands when you're talking. I'm a this when I talk, and it's
about Candy's done a lot of training around holding a space, which is very important, and obviously it's something that counsellors often do. So it is an art in itself, holding your space and not giving advice, but it is obviously generally that is very good for people as well. So you have, I kind of feel like we'll eventually maybe have 2 armed approach to it, where
I think
we have
so,
the Death
yes.
Cafe, which is an open space. You just talk. There is no advice, because sometimes people don't want advice.
No.
You know, it's often the case, isn't it? People often say to you, "I'm not looking. Why do you keep trying to offer solutions? I'm not after solutions." It can actually really upset people.
Yeah.
And then to have something where people are offered, okay, you do need mental health support for this, and this is a really good place to go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've always put on the caveat of mine that it isn't a counselling or a bereavement session. You know, it is just to talk about death and dying, but then getting things off your chest is, like you say, is in its own way, it's counselling and it is support, because if people have got a deep set bereavement or counselling issue that they need, then they do need to talk to somebody. And it may be that have these conversations puts that into perspective, that actually they do need to talk to somebody, so that would be helpful. And I think the other thing that you're not supposed to have, if I'm right, is professionals. I read it as not having professionals kind of on board, whereas I've got 2 funeral directors who come to mind, not to tout for business, but just if somebody is, I mean, we had a conversation which I shall revisit in a later talk about cremation, and somebody said they were genuinely scared about whether they got their mum's ashes back or not. And you know,
steps.
yeah, and you know, I have been to Maidstone Crematorium, and I have had a tour around the back. The lovely lady that works there, lovely lady called Lindsay. When I first started doing celebrancy, I said, I want, because before my first one, I just wanted to go, and I'd only ever been there as a mourner, and I wanted to go and stand at the lectern and look out and see what that felt like as part of my journey. And she said, "Why did you want to have a look at the back?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was there for an hour, and I went out the back and I saw the furnaces at work. And I've seen the computer tracking system, and you know, I am very much assured that the ashes you get are the ashes, because you have to put their name in, you have to put a key code in, you have to, there's no way you just pull them out and go, "Oh, is this Bert? Oh, well, we'll shove them in Bert's."
Was this again? Oh no, I forgot.
Yeah, you know, you have to match up, you have to put a code in, and it's a long process. And I've been out the back of you know, and it was very interesting, and I think I could be saying this out of turn, but I think if you ask, you are allowed to go. I mean, I didn't have to get special permission, and I know
some faiths actually permit that. Some faiths, you are the person who turns on the cremation machine. So yes, in some circumstances, generally, I think it's based generally on faith.
But you know, I think if anybody was that curious and wanted to see for themselves, I mean, I don't want to give, you know, the local crematorium this sudden rush of visitors going like
very popular in the Victorian age.
But it was when they first opened, people would go along for like pretty much open days to see how it worked. And you know, that's the thing about how removed we are from the process of death and dying and talking about it and seeing it. And I think that's why these death conversations that you do and I do are so useful, because we're used to people going into hospital or into a nursing home and it's all sanitized and it's all, you know, I mean, I'm nearly 50 and my grandparents died in one granddad died at home, but that was because they had quite a bit of money and he could pay. Not they weren't rich, but he was nursed at home. But everybody else was in hospital because they were poorly or they were in a nursing home. And my mum, I was talking to my mum, who is nearly 75. She'll kill me for saying that, but she's 75 this year. She remembers her nan dying at home with her. Not with her, but in their house. They lived in the same house. And people coming and going and her being laid out in the front room. And that would have been when my mum was about 9. So that's early mid 50s. But in that space of time, that's changed. And obviously now we've got soul doulas and palliative care, and the you know, the Heart of Kent Hospice, for example, they encourage you to go in, they encourage you to go and see people. But it's quite a new phenomena. I managed to say that word right without stumbling over it.
It's doing
it is on how you look at, you know, person-centered care, I guess it is, from you know, the health and social care background. But has that come across in the conversations you've had? Do you think that there's been a change and people haven't I mean, the old days you would have had granny laid out in, you know, the front room, and you know, you would have held, you'd have had candles in there, and people would have come in hushed tones and gone to pay their respects. Whereas now, if you go and see somebody in a chapel of rest, I've done that, and it's quite, I found that really difficult because I wasn't used to it when I did it. Now
the space was new, you mean, or
the what? Sorry.
Do you mean because you didn't know the space and so it felt unusual?
Do you know that it's possibly that the first time was I went and saw somebody who was dead. It was in a funeral director's, and you went up this long corridor, and it was, it could have been that it wasn't our space, and it wasn't. I mean, my daughter's watching, and I'm sure she's thinking, no, I don't want you laid out in the lounge, Mum. We have got people watching us, by the way.
Lovely.
But my daughter's watching, and like, you know, we've only ever had experience of people being in hospices, or I mean, I know Sophie won't mind me saying, but her granddad died at home, but her nan was with him. So, but that was somewhat unusual. But we've only otherwise had experience of people being in hospices and nursing homes. We've not had anybody at home. I don't know if you have. Have you experienced that?
So I came from, I guess my family were generally very protective of me, like they didn't really know me. In a way, it was like, okay, we mustn't let her see the dying relative. As I've obviously got older and a bit more confident, I've become so much more open around conversation around death and dying. And my nan was a nurse for most of her life, and so
right.
we had very honest conversations, and I think she kind of got the idea through that. She was like, oh, okay, I can have quite clear conversations with Natasha. And then they didn't ask me, when my granddad died, they didn't ask me whether I wanted to go and see him. I requested it with the funeral directors, which then meant that they rang my nan. It's all a bit awkward. I didn't know what they were going to do. I didn't know. So they rang my nan, and my nan's probably like, oh, but she was amazing. She was very much like, you're old enough to make your own decisions. And it was interesting because although she'd been a nurse all her life, she was like, I don't want you to have nightmares. And I was like, I know that I'm not going to. I know enough about this whole situation to know that no one has ever had nightmares from that experience. And you know, that I think it was so great to make that breakthrough with my family, almost that we could have that as a shared experience, because my auntie and my nan had been there with my granddad when he had died in the hospice. And again, I felt like I was shielded from it, the whole experience, because of COVID, actually.
Oh, right. It was quite recent then.
Yeah, so I wasn't able to be there, but still, it's been really good to open that conversation. And then recently, speaking to a friend whose son died, I don't know about her personally and her feelings towards this, but her daughter, who was younger than I am, said that she wanted to go and see her brother, you know. And I was just like, this is amazing. This is so important that people, you know, that young people go and do this. And like you said, I don't know what your mum's experience was, but this was a thing. Speaking to people like a long time ago, when I was first starting to think about running a deaf cafe, when I spoke about it, people would say to me, oh yeah, like I went to go and see my dad, and I took my son with me, who was like 10. He wanted to go and say goodbye, and like the experience of the 10-year-old when they went to do it was just incredible. Like, child totally got it, found it very grounding, and resolved a lot of things around death for them. And it's so important. And I think that's so, and this is the thing, once people start to realize that it's not going to damage them psychologically, it's actually probably going to help and support their mental health, then I think we'll have more people that can have these amazing experiences.
Because I think you know, obviously it can be upsetting. I mean, you know, for my mind, when somebody's gone and you can't see them. And I was 6 when my nan died, and I wanted to go to the funeral, and my lovely mum and dad decided that I was too young. And at 6, you know, that was their call, and I probably was, and I absolutely adored my nan, and I didn't go. And it was, I struggled. I know I was young, I was 6. I struggled to work out where she'd gone, and I really missed her. And she hadn't been poorly, so that was a bit of a shock. So that might have been part of that process. But my my other nan, I saw her the day she died, and she was breathing, but so shallowly that I could understand that the next step, and obviously I was a grown up by then, so the next step I could see. But I didn't, like, my father-in-law died in October 2019. I didn't go and see him because I'd been with him up till the very last, and I knew, and I didn't need to. But my husband wasn't able to be there, so because he was away and he couldn't get back because he's a lorry driver, he just couldn't, because of the driving time, he just could not get back. It sounds crazy. He would have lost his license, lost his job. You can't bend the rules if you've driven for so many hours. I remember phoning him, and he was at Stonehenge. He was in the lay-by by Stonehenge, and I had to phone him and tell him. But
so far,
he just couldn't get back in time. But I think having that, like you say, when do you tell children, and talking to children about it? And from my experience, my children lost grandparents when they were, were you still watching? How old were you when Granddad died? That would have been 10 years ago. So she would have been 12, 13. So she was old enough to be able to, I mean, they went to the funerals, and my son lost his nan last year. Last year. So obviously he was a grown up. So we've been lucky that we've had that. But you know, for some children, you can't shield them from the fact that their mum or their dad's not there, or their little brother or sister or big brother or sister's not there. And that's when I think, how you deal with children, and then quite often they are so more resilient than you think, if you're open. And I've always found, when my two were little, that if they came and asked a question, usually to do with the birds and the bees, you'd give them a little bit. And when they came back and asked another question, you knew you know, I mean, I remember, for example, my son saying, how do you make a baby, when I was pregnant with my daughter? And I said, you know, you have a cuddle, a special cuddle. And he was like, oh, okay. And off he tried, because that had satisfied that. When he wanted to know a bit more,
that developmental stage, that was
they can understand. So with, you know, you say, nanny, granddad, or mummy, daddy's not here anymore. Well, where are they? They've gone to heaven. If they don't see that transition in some way, shape or form done, I mean, obviously for a child to see somebody drop down dead in front of them is horrific. It's horrific for anybody. But when it's done, and I think this is when it's done carefully and with people, you know, thinking about how they're doing it, it's going to be very powerful and very helpful for future life. And again, if you don't talk about it, you can't, you know. And it's having these conversations. We've got my friend Jenny is going to lay me out in the lounge and surround me with ducks. Thank you, Jenny.
Ducks. Do you like ducks?
No, we've got a standing joke about ducks. And she also says, I definitely think there is something healing and healthy to see the deceased as past. I think the euphemistic answers we can be tempted to give children can be quite confusing. And do you know the one sorry?
I was going to say, saying things like they've been taken to heaven is always like, I'm just like, oh no, that sounds like someone has taken them away.
Where have they gone?
And I think, that's it. And I think, and obviously there's so many things that we don't even understand. So finding a way to say things that is obviously it is down to the parents, because it's down to whatever faith
and what that child
time
can understand.
That's it. And obviously you can leave it open and say to a child, like, well, I believe in this, but it, you know, it's entirely, if you believe that they've gone off to magical unicorn land, then that is completely up to you. Like, then it is, isn't it? Because it's like that whole thing of, if that's what you believe, then it is true. Do you know what I mean?
It's like the rainbow bridge for animals, isn't it? Do you know?
Exactly.
And I remember a friend of mine died, and that would have been 2002. So my children were small. They were 7 and 5, and they sort of said, has he gone up the rainbow? We'd not long lost a pet.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they said, oh, has Trevor gone up the rainbow bridge with Jaffa? But the cat was Jaffa. And I went,
Yeah. Oh.
something like that, because that's how much they understood.
Yeah.
But you saying about, Jenny saying about the things we use, I remember being in town with my nan, and she talked about somebody had lost somebody, and I was wandering around thinking, well, where's this woman lost her husband? Where you know,
exactly.
it's the words you use, and where you don't. And the other thing that really sticks in my head is, I was in town with my nan again, and she said, oh, I must just go and speak to Mr. whoever. And I said, oh, why? She goes, oh, because his wife died, darling. And I went, won't it make you sad talking about, won't you make him sad by saying that? And she said to me, well, darling, he's already sad. And she said, I remember when Granddad died, people I've known all my life crossed the street so as not to have to talk to me, because they didn't want to say sorry to hear about John. So, and that stayed with me. So I always talk to people. They probably think, go away. But I always say, how are you? And, you know, I'm sorry.
And that's it. Yeah, it's very hard, like having, and I think the thing is I having gone through like 2 significant bereavements last year, I now, when I watch people that are grieving, I understand it so much better from the point of view of, like, you just start to really hate everyone and hate the world. You just go into this loathing, and there's nothing you can say that can be right. There's just nothing.
No, that's true.
There's nothing you can say that will bring any comfort, and you will just hate everything that person or people say to you.
Yeah.
And you just have to let that go, and then that person will adjust, and then things will be, and like I got really fed up of people constantly asking me how I was. I'm like, how do you think I am? Like, honestly, like, how do you think I am? And so now I'm really conscious of that. But I just always say to people, honestly, if you need anything, especially with COVID, obviously, even if it's just one thing from the shop and you don't want to leave the house, like, please just let me know. And so, you know, so things like that, isn't it? You just want to stay in your pajamas anyway.
It's quite often it's just knowing someone's there, just to, you know, because that's what I see as one of the benefits of the death conversation, is having those chats and saying, do you know what, when so and so died and somebody kept phoning me up, I felt like saying, will you please just leave me alone? I want to. I'm in the angry stage of grief. I'm in the depressed stage of grief. Nothing, like you say, nothing you're going to do is going to make me happy right now, so just leave me alone. And being able to voice that and say, no, that's not being ungrateful, that is a stage of grief, that is. And I don't think we talk about that enough. And this is the sort of thing that you can talk about at a death cafe. You can talk about, when I was bereaved, I was angry, and knowing the stages of grief, you know, knowing that there's denial, acceptance, anger, bargaining. What's the other one, Natasha?
Oh God,
there's 5. But there's depending on what model you look at.
Yes, so many different experiences, and they go. The thing is, as well, it's like it doesn't follow a pattern. It's just erratic. That was the thing, wasn't it? That with the 5 models of grief. That it's Kessler, wasn't it?
Yes, that's it.
Very much like, this has been completely misinterpreted. It isn't like a train.
It's not linear.
Like, it's a train wreck, is what it is.
That's what it is. And knowing that, I mean, obviously, like we said, this isn't about bereavement counselling, you know, but knowing that actually you weren't going mad, and knowing that at some point you're going to go through this again, and knowing that actually it's okay to be all those things. And it's something I learned on the Soul Midwife introduction course that me and my friend Jenny went on, was they called the 5 stages, and we touched on this when we were chatting the other day, the 5 stages, the different elements of the dying process. They called them after the elements: earth, air, wind, earth, air, fire and water. And again, it's not linear. You don't go fire, earth, air, water. You go fire, earth, fire, earth, water, air. And
really good point.
And it's a kind of a reflection of what happens afterwards. And these are all, I mean, I was going to ask you what you think the benefits were of holding a death cafe, of participating in a death cafe. And I think we found a lot of them just by chatting about them, that, you know, it's being able to talk about things that, and it's not morbid. You've got other people there who are going, do you know, when that happened to me, I felt this, or I felt that, or have you ever wondered about such and such? What happens with this? And, you know, what sort of things have you found people have been wanting to discuss, and how beneficial has it been for them?
Yeah, I think a lot of people like to talk about how they would like their own funeral to be,
Yeah.
because of the experiences they've had with loved ones. And it's kind of helped reinforce that. So they already maybe had a bit of a crazy idea in their head, but it means that after they've got it out in the open, they then go back to their family and say, this is what I want. And which is amazing. And you know, we do get the people that do get really like teared up, and it is kind of, it's interesting because I don't think those people they didn't go for support, they just went to be heard.
Yeah.
And that's so important, just to be heard. And obviously when you're doing training around just listening, like it's so valuable. And so people they just go to be heard. That's all they're looking for when they attend the Death Cafe. And it is a lot of discussions about experiences they've had of good funerals, bad funerals, a lot of conversations about sorting out houses when people like out properties, and then the issues that come up with family trying to interfere, or, you know, bad blood, things like that.
And that's something that people don't necessarily talk about, because you don't want to admit that. But again, in the ones I've done, the ones I've done with my friends have been quite light-hearted. And a friend of mine I know she won't mind me saying, talking about the funerals, her dad collects stuff for a local charity, and one of the things he collects is jigsaws. And she said in his garage there are so many jigsaws that he hasn't, because he checks them all to make sure. And she said, so at his funeral, she said, because they've talked about it, they've got they've had their death conversation with each other, and she said, I've told him I'm going to stand at the end of his funeral and hand out jigsaws to everybody. Go, I'm not checking them, you can do them. But, you know, I mean, actually a joke, but, you know, he has got all these things to, you know, you wouldn't want to just bin them. But clearing a house, I helped my mum a little bit with my nan, but I've not had to do that, and that must be so gutty, and that must be such a huge task. And I know if you've got a council house, if someone's got a council property, I think you've got, is it 2 or 4 weeks to do that?
Yeah, because somebody I know recently seemed to take it upon themselves to sort it out, because they were a close friend, so they were kind of considered next of kin, but they weren't legally, because really it should be family's responsibility. But the family were not at that point. Like, I spoke to this person last, didn't know, had cut themselves off from the person. And they were saying that they had 2 weeks to empty it, but I was very much like, just get out things which you feel like you need to get out, because essentially it isn't your problem where the washing machine goes. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's only so much stress you can put on yourself, but it's very hard to make that break when you see it as being somebody's property. But I don't get that at all. I think there should be so much, like, there should be more done in those circumstances to protect property, because also people can break in once they know. People can, you know, as much as people are very kind, people can also do very unusual things if they've given stuff away and then they feel like it's theirs and they want it back, even though they gifted it. It's very bizarre.
Oh, okay. Very strange. I mean,
poor communities anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like, obviously, like, if you've got you know, sorting out a house is physical as well as emotional, isn't it? You've got, you know, I mean, if you've got something that you're going to sell, or, you know, that's not something, you've got a bit more time. But if you've got that,
isn't it?
It's the physical energy when you aren't feeling great, and that's the sort of thing that people can discuss and say, actually, no, you're not being a wimp. That is tough. That's really, really tough. And, you know, generally discussing you know, like you say about good funerals, you know, or and something that somebody saw and thought, I'd really like that, or actually I went to this and this happened, and I don't want that. I don't want to be, you know, it's just having that conversation. And I think once you've had a conversation and you've voiced the things you've thought and you've started thinking about it, then you can think about what it is you want. Sometimes you only know what you want by finding out what you don't want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely.
You know, like, and sort of you, when you're stuck with a huge thing to sort out, and for, you know, talking about dying is, you know, my friend Sue says there's only three things definite in life, and I'm like, three? She goes, yeah, being born, dying, and taxes. And you know, but you know it's going to happen. And I think where it's removed from us, we don't think about it. We don't have to face it as daily as we do. I mean, you know, some people have to face it all the time, or some people face it a lot more.
Well, it's about the medicalisation of death, isn't it? Which I've had to write about a lot. And the issue is, and it hadn't really occurred to me until I started kind of studying it more. But basically, if you go into hospital, the staff are driven to keep you alive.
Yeah.
So no matter what. So that's why so many people are dying in hospital, because they're not like, okay, there's an acceptance around this person's going to die. We've done all we can do. Let's send them home, because they are pushed from a professional point of view to keep the person alive. And then because of us being so less connected to death, people generally family push to keep that person alive, and then they die in hospital. And then you're disconnected from it because you were not able to be there, but also that person's experience then of dying has been different, and it's very much like, okay, I guess I need to go now, and it's been like half an hour, and it's whereas, you know, your experience, if that person had died at home, you know, you could be with the person for days if you wanted to. You know, there's no rush.
It's sterile as well, isn't it? And you know, and as well, like you say, you know, the medical teams are driven to keeping people alive, and it's almost a failure when somebody dies. But we are all going to die. That is the basic truth. We are all, you know, we're born to die. We you know, we're slowly sort of disintegrating as we go, and especially approaching 50, I definitely feel my body's going, whoa, enough already. You know, the knees are going and whatnot. But it's, you know, it's very much that it's been, it's not a failure to die. It is, and I think that what I will come on to when I speak to, in a few weeks' time, a lovely lady called Jean, is about dying well, and you know, how you achieve that, which is something that I think this death conversation is a precursor to. That, you know, you get your head round something that's been not been thought about for a long time, and it's mentioned in you know, people say death, so-and-so died, or you know, cancer, you know, and you whisper it because you don't want to voice it out there. And if you're not voicing it, and if you're not talking about when so-and-so died, because people think you're morbid. That's the thing, you know, people.
Sometimes people, even because obviously Death Cafe, initially people are like, oh, that's not very sensitive, is it? It's like, well, what's sensitive about death? Like, like what can how do you tread around the issue without it being upsetting? You can't. So you might as well just be like, okay, yeah, we're talking about death and dying, like,
which is why it's not for the very recently bereaved and those that are still struggling, because it is for reflective thought further down the line, isn't it?
Definitely. Yeah, you know, I mean, people can certainly, I guess I would say that probably for people that are recently bereaved, that they might find comfort from just listening in. So obviously at the moment where you don't have to attend in person, it's online. Listening in can be really good because you can then hear other people's experiences. You might be able to feel like, oh, okay, they're down, they're feeling that way. It's been a few years later on. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and there's obviously many podcasts which can help as well from that point of view. It can be very reassuring to know that, like you say, you're not lost your mind. It is perfectly normal to feel the way you do. But yeah, to feel like you have to contribute is asking a bit much. In fact, I was speaking yesterday to my husband about what I'd learned recently about willpower and how willpower is finite. So we only have like so much of it. Literally, we only have so much that we can use up. And so when it's gone, that's it. Well, that's when we can start to get very depressed and have panic attacks and things like that. So from the point of view of what you were saying about what we were talking about, clearing out a house or responsibilities you have even just looking after other parts of the family that might be bereaved, because through that bereavement, like we only have so much energy to deal with those things, that then to feel like we have to contribute even in a conversation at a deaf cafe is likely going to be too much. But to listen in is might be supportive.
I mean, obviously mine have all had to be online because I started doing this last year. You've done the live ones, but obviously COVID is going to have changed the way we think about death, the way we've approached it, because it is a pandemic. People, so many people have died because of COVID that some might have passed away last year anyway, some wouldn't have done. And I think now, certainly June, July last year, I knew of people who knew of people. Now I know people who have lost people from COVID. I know people who have died of COVID now. And I think that is a very different way, because like you said about not seeing them, we haven't got that physical presence. I mean, like at the moment, a funeral, you can have 30 people at a funeral. And they have to be spread out. It's a bit different for graveside because
the process has been completely messed up.
So I mean, for example, so you're talking of less than a third of Maidstone you can use, and so about a third of Maidstone's capacity and Medway's capacity. They're both chapels. That's less than a third of their capacity. So that's a grim way for somebody to go as well. And it's those things that I think are going to promote conversations this year about a different kind of disconnectedness to the dying process and the dying conversations. That if someone is poorly, I mean, I had a friend last year whose mum went into hospital, not with COVID, and she didn't see her again because of COVID. She couldn't see her again, although she was in there for 2 weeks, because she couldn't go in and see her. And that was horrific for her. So her experience is going to be different to somebody else who was able to go and see their mum in a hospice
it varied
regularly.
It varied through the year as well as to how strained the health services were, and the knowledge as well that they had about people visiting and the safety involved. And so I think that, to be honest, I think when the pandemic is over, I think that there will be, I expect myself to grieve, not again, but I expect there to be an extension of my grief, that because I can share my experience, which is I've not been able to do. It's not the same digitally.
No, of course not.
I think a lot of people, but I think within that there's also a movement, which obviously comes out of a lot of when there is something catastrophic that happens, there is a shift. So I think that being part of that shift is also a positive, being able to be part of that conversation and reflect on all of that, alongside being, I guess, almost united within that grief, that can be quite powerful, and that we move together to think, well, we know we certainly don't want dying to happen behind closed doors. There we go. That's something that comes out of that.
That is it. Quite simply, that is it. And the whole process and talking about it is the whole ethos of what you do and what I do, is that it's discussed and it's open, and that it's not hidden away. And I think that's it's not behind closed doors. I think that's the complete, that sums it up better than anything I could think of. So I think we'll leave that there, because I think that's the perfect note to end it on. And that's the whole, I could not describe, I'm so glad you came on, Natasha, because I couldn't have described that any better myself, that death and dying is not behind closed doors. I might quote you on that. I should make up a little canvas square when you see it next week. But it's true. It's true. So thank you for everybody that joined us. Oh, and Kim's just popped in now, and Kim works at Funeral Directors. So watch it through, Kim, and give us your opinion. But thank you so much for joining us.
tell people when our deaf cafes are?
Yeah,
So that they
definitely.
can...
Yeah. So I was just going to say, if you want to tell us how people can get hold of your deaf cafes, where they are, and then if you go on to the page and put the links on afterwards.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
So yes, so we have our Deaf Cafe on the last Wednesday of every month at 8 o'clock through Zoom. So if you go onto the Brown Bread Collective, you'll see. I think there's definitely a poster up already. I can't remember if
Yes,
we've...
there is 27th, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, 27 Wednesday,
Yeah.
27th at 8 p.m. So that's one of your options, and then Claire can give you another option. For...
Oh, and mine are Time to Talk. They're every third Sunday of the month, and they are on the Mind Body Spirit online studio, which my friend Sue runs, which you've obviously seen the adverts for. But if you put a link up on this afterwards, Natasha, and you can put it there. But and they're free. They're all free. Nobody has to pay. I couldn't stand to profiteer from from death. And is your community place, is that free as well, obviously, for you to hire?
And the space, I'm a co-worker there, so they very kindly donated us the space there to use it. Yeah, because it's open to the co-workers there if they want to attend as well.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, there is a community space in Mason where there used to be one held, but when I checked the website on people doing that, there hasn't been one held in Maidstone physically from what I can see from about 2017, which is sad. But it may be something that comes up after COVID. It may be once we can do it again. I'd definitely be interested in doing them face to face, because I think you get something different from
exactly.
You get something from Zoom that you don't get, because you can go, even if you're thinking, oh, I really can't be bothered, it's a wet dark night, if you can plug in, it might encourage you to come out. But those that actually want the human contact, once COVID is under control,
I think I'd like to offer both options when we go back to meeting in person. I ideally, if I can set up my laptop even and put it on a chair so the person can be present, And
I think that's one of our one of the gifts of COVID has been people, their little tendrils have gone out over the ether, over the internet, and we've found ways to still connect and still not be tucked away and hidden away. I'd never heard of Zoom before the internet, before COVID, never, and somebody said about Zooming you. I'm like, what's that? But I do so many things on it at the moment because it's our only way to connect, and that's got to say something about the human condition and spirit and ego and all of that, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
So I'll let you close with your wonderful quote, because that was just an awesome quote. So can we remember what it was now?
We don't want dying behind doors.
Yeah, we definitely don't want dying behind closed doors. So thank you, Natasha. I'm going to end this live. So thanks everybody for joining us, and Natasha's going to put her link to the Brown Bread Collective on the notes afterwards. So thanks a lot, everyone. Bye.